Hey everybody, my name is Ed. Okay, so this is going to be kind of a brief topic video. I kind of had the video, the idea of this like maybe a couple of weeks ago, or I would say over the last couple of weeks, just seeing things where people are just saying how in general they're getting a little bit burnt out on comics and oh maybe I don't want to buy any new comics, maybe I should sell my collection or I'm really tired of what's going on in the industry these days. Of course, there's a lot of people who are like fed up with Marvel and I don't like Marvel anymore. I should stop reading comics. And so this kind of like a reaction to seeing stuff like that. My thing is, well, well, let's just go here. Let's just go here. My thing is, well, first of all, just thinking specifically the whole thing of like with Marvel, blah blah blah. Marvel's the gold standard, and Marvel's the industry leader, and now their comics suck. So um, now I don't know what to do. And my thing about that is, you know, there's a world that exists beyond Marvel Comics. Well, first of all, I don't even know if I really accept the whole idea that Marvel's the gold standard. And I'm not saying this as a guy that's hating on Marvel or shitting on Marvel or anything like that. Anybody that watches my videos know that I grew up reading Marvel comics. I still buy Marvel comics today. But like I said, there's a whole world that exists beyond just Marvel superheroes. You can have a great enjoyable hobby, um, enjoy the hobby of comic book reading and collecting and never touch a Marvel comic. You know what I mean? There's all sorts of things that have come out that have been innovative and pushed the industry forward and pushed the medium forward over the last 30 years that had nothing to do with Marvel. I could, just off the top of my head, Watchmen was not a Marvel comic. Sandman is not a Marvel comics. Love and Rockets is not a Marvel comics. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is not a Marvel comics. Miles is not a Marvel comics. Persepolis is not a Marvel comics. Uh, I don't know if I mentioned Dark Knight Returns. Those aren't Marvel comics. Marvel was not the first people to give artists and writers royalties. They weren't the first people to offer creator rights. You know what I mean? And again, I'm not saying this to crap on Marvel at all. I'm saying there's stuff out there besides just Marvel. Okay, there's other TV stations besides NBC and ABC. There's other music you can listen to besides what's on the top 40 radio station. You know what I mean? So, so related to that, it's I always wonder about people. Well, I shouldn't say I wonder about people, but it always gets me thinking when people say, "Oh, I, what do you do? Marvel sucks now, so what do you do?" Well, I would say this is the perfect time that if you're fed up with Marvel or you're fed up with DC or you're fed up with mainstream comics in general, the thing to do is to kind of step outside of that, step outside the box, go outside of what you're used to, and I think you can still find enjoyable aspects of the hobby to enjoy. Okay, so what I would say to, somebody that's getting kind of, who feels like, comics are getting kind of stale or stagnant is to, well, on one hand, you could just like take a break, take a 6 month break or a year break or whatever and come back or whatever. And just, don't read anything for a while. But the other thing I would encourage is to kind of like, think outside the box a little bit and kind of break out of your, uh, I don't want to say bubble, but I can't think of a better word to use. If you're that Marvel guy, step outside of that and read some DC comics. If you're that DC guy, try out some Marvel comics. If you're somebody who mainly just buys the big two, try some indie comics. If you're somebody who's fed up with newer comics, dive back into the history, dive back into some back issues and things like that. If you're an indie guy and you think only indie comics are interesting, maybe try some mainstream comics, but maybe try something that's a little bit more on the fringe of Marvel or DC. Not necessarily their big franchise characters, but some of their B characters or some of the maybe other genres that they kind of put out and things like that. I always find myself, what do I want to say? I don't know if I want to say refreshed is the right word to use, but if I'm reading in, if I'm reading, Marvel and DC for a while, then I'm reading, more literary comics. Put that in quotes, or more, indie things and things like that. I always find that when I do go back to like the Avengers or the Justice League or Batman or whatever it is, I'm able to look at it with fresh eyes after, sometimes when I'm reading, stuff like, superhero comics, it's always nice to take a break from the big soap opera and this comic book and this title and these ongoing events and have you have to read two or three titles just to get a story. Sometimes it's nice to just read, one series as its own contained thing, and that's all I can need to concentrate on. Um, it is so, in my mind, it's rewarding when you are able to see uh, what do I want to say? The expansiveness of like comics as a medium, as a hobby, as an industry, as all that sort of thing. Learning more and more about things. Like I don't read tons of manga. Actually, I actually read very very little manga. But if I have more time, I would get into it. And the little bit I have read, again, just learning to read left to right is excuse me, is an experience in and of itself. You know what I mean? Um, same thing with reading older comics versus reading newer comics. Reading comic books from the 70s, they were so incredibly dense because the page count was so small. The pages of a normal comic book back in the 70s, in the mid 70s, was like only like 17 pages, 17 to 18 pages. So reading a comic book like that, especially reading two or three in a row versus picking up a modern comic with, all the decompression, it's like you have to kind of readjust your thinking a little bit. But that's fine. That's fine. I find it's very very interesting. And I think there's, like I said, I think it's a rewarding thing to kind of just step outside of like your comfort zone. That's why I kind of find it interesting when, people say, well, I only care about good stories. But it's like, yeah, but you keep reading this title that you already know that you don't like. you know Try something different. You know you don't like this thing from Marvel. You know you don't like this artist at DC. You don't like, those things, and they're letting you down or being disappointed. So try something different. You know what I mean? I get it. I was there too. I was very much a part of the. I read this title. I read the Avengers. Oh, the Avengers aren't good right now. Um, but you keep buying it, hoping that it's going to get better. But I think there's a truism there where if you keep buying it regardless, they have no reason to like change anything they're doing, and all you're doing is making the thing that hobby or the hobby or the activity that you used to go to for fun and enjoyment. Now it's becoming a chore, and you don't want your hobby to turn into a chore. There's comics out there that are essentially memoirs, stuff like Blankets by Craig Thompson, or Persepolis, or Funhouse by Alison Bechdel, and the Chester Brown stuff and the stuff by Seth, and tons of other people, where they're basically stories about these people's lives, slice of life comics. But they work because you're getting ordinary people talking about events that happened in their lives and how these things shape the people they are, and stuff like that. I know that's not everybody's cup of tea, but if you're somebody that likes genre fiction, step outside of uh, Ed Brubaker's Captain America comics. Give his crime comic books a try. You're somebody that likes stuff like Doctor Strange. Uh, Try something like Hellboy. if or any of the kind of like indie horror comics that are coming out now. If you're somebody who wants to stick to like Marvel and DC, check out some of the older copies of stuff like Tales of the Unexpected or House of Mystery that DC used to put out. Marvel used to put out black and white horror magazines and stuff, Haunt of Horror and stuff like that. And those were basically imitations of like the Warren horror comics, creepy and eerie and Vampirella. These things that used to have like this marvelous art by some of these people would end up, working for Marvel and DC. Alex Nino, that's a name that just comes off the top of my head, or now I can't think of his name, Rudy Nebris or something like that. I can't remember his name. Rudy something or other. Well, I'm not gonna go dig it out, but I'm like picturing his art right now. Somebody knows who I'm talking about, but all these people, uh, Marvel used to do lots of create their own comics back in the 80s. There was their Epic line of comics, and of course they were doing it because they had to compete with all the indies that were coming up in the 80s, guys like Pacific Comics and First Comics and Eclipse Comics. All these people were not paying the artists as much upfront, but they were letting people retain their copyrights and trademarks. So in lieu of stopping all these guys, Jack Kirby was an early person who went to Pacific Comics. Mike Grell, to stop everybody from jumping ship, they had to offer a similar plan. Um, but uh, but yeah, but even going back to all those old comics, there's some really interesting, fun stuff that was put out uh, from that line. Even if you do stick to the big two, there's so much interesting stuff out there. I actually think DC has done a good job of being able to promote and having success with some of their fringe titles and their vertical line and stuff like that. I find it really disappointing that Marvel hasn't been able to do the same because um, they're really great at promoting their 616 titles, their main superhero universe title, but they're terrible at promoting other things that they put out. It's like I find out they've put out stuff like it's like I find out they've put out these things like almost by accident. Like, well, I think they were doing good with the Stephen King line, but they had like comics like George Romero, the horror movie director, comic book adaptations of like William Patterson novels. William Patterson, a best-selling novelist. They were doing adaptations of like Pride and Prejudice and stuff like that, and it's like these things got absolutely no promotion. It just boggles my mind. Those, in my opinion, those are things that actually could bring people who don't normally read comics into comics. But you've got to let people know that those things exist. But anyway, but yeah, but the point being, even if you stick to Marvel and DC, there's like fun, interesting things they've put out that that are a little bit off the beaten path or a little bit off the beaten road, and can be interesting even if they aren't the best comics. They're just interesting to kind of investigate and read and kind of learn about. But okay, I guess that's what I wanted to say. And, if you feel things are getting stale in comics, you know what I mean. Uh, just take a chance on something that you're not that familiar with. You know, kind of investigate the other areas or the other corners of the hobby that you don't maybe necessarily look into. If you're a Marvel guy, uh, check out some Image comics. If you're a Fantagraphics guy, check out some DC or Vertical comics. If you're a Grant Morrison guy, check out some Robert Crumb. If you're uh, if you're I don't know, Milt Caniff guy, check out some Jonathan Hickman. If like I said, if you're a guy who's a back issue guy, get a small pull going, like maybe two or three things that you think are interesting. It's same thing in reverse. If you're a new guy, you're burnt out on all the revamps and the events and everything like that. Check out some back issues. Get back into the history and things like that. So, okay, I guess that's it. Thank you very much for watching. You guys have a good day.